chapter 4, and Bipul Singh. Bipul is here, and Bipul's chapter is Governing Fluvial Commons in Colonial Bihar, Alluvion and Diluvion Regulation in Decommunization. Over to you, Bipul, for next 2-3 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Prateep. So, as Prateep just mentioned, that Bay of Bengal is such a happening region. And my case study is actually about the region. It talks about the governing fluvial commons in colonial Bihar, and it discusses the different bodies of facts that were introduced to address the problem of revenue collection in the Dera land of colonial Eastern India of Bay of Bengal. So while I talk about this, I examine the process of decommunization of the common land in this part of India. There is essentially, let me tell you a little bit about it. There is essentially a kind of a landmark in the river, it's like an island, and its formation is a result of sand and silt deposition over a long period of time. So what happens that in the initial years, a new land is created with sand, which is not very useful for cultivation. But then in subsequent years, it is then leveled by fertile silt. So what happens that after 8-10 years, the river tide starts chiseling out deposited silt from the kind of in a world's land, and then this Dera land is created. So Dera is in that sense kind of a cyclical phenomena, and this is very common in this mid Ganga part of eastern India. So I have taken Bihar as a case study to understand what is happening in the Dera land in the 19th century. Now, because of its non-permanent nature, the community of the boatmen and the fishers, they live on these lands in temporary settlements, and they are severely dependent on the river for their irrigation needs, for their fishing, for their communication. So they move on boats, and it's very common in that part of the river. Now, the traditional rulers in the region understood the local ecology, and therefore they never imposed any kind of taxes on these kind of lands. So if you talk about the zamindars, who were the traditional holders of much of the upland of the floodplains, they left the Dera commons for the boatmen and fishers, and they stayed away from it. So there was no intervention at all. So traditionally, Dera land was a jointly used territory. But with the introduction of a series of new acts during the 19th century, that is all this story is about. The entire idea of leaving the land as common property, it was lost. So the whole process of decommunization started, and especially after 1770 famine in Bengal, which was a massive famine, which had a huge mortality. The colonial government of the British East India Company claimed that there had been a huge amount of revenue loss. So they came up with some idea of collecting more and more revenue from these areas. Now the end result was that in the early 19th century, the state began to plan for widening the base of land revenue. And then the colonial government went on to pass the Alluvion and Diluvion Regulation Act of 1825, which is the major emphasis of this paper. And this was done in order to bring even a newly averted land under the permanent settlement to maximize the revenue. So what happens that the government was successful in taking the economic control of the averted territories through various acts and rules, and this led to massive Dera community migrations. So as Prateep was telling us that he has seen many migrations taking place in these areas. Now this is an area, this is a kind of a land which I call ephemeral, which is seeing full lot of migrations in those parts of India in the 19th century, and that continued even in the 20th century. So here, the driving force for decommunization were not just ecological, even though this is an ecologically very hostile zone. So the driving force actually here is the political and socio-economic, factors, and this is what I have emphasized on. So this historical narrative, in a way, suggests how life of the common actually flips into new regime characterized by whole kind of centralization and rent-seeking attitude that the state come up with. So this is the story of my chapter, and I think you'll be finding it very interesting. It's been written with a trust on the process of decommunization. Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,